Again, it was truly an outstanding fight. Just a postscript to that, Letterlow tragically was shot to death in just a random shooting, inexplicably, July of 2005. Again, we saw Letterlow quite a bit here on Friday Night Fights. Many of his fights were that exciting. He always brought it, always fought with a lot of heart. Again, one of our best fights of 10 years here on Friday Night Fights. All right, a stunning admission in one of boxing's darker stories. Luis Resto was already convicted of using tampered gloves 25 years ago against Billy Collins Jr. Now he says not only was the padding taken out of his gloves, but he had plaster on his hand wraps. Collins' widow says Resto told her last summer these revelations. There's a 1983 bout, and it's the subject now of a new documentary. And a news conference yesterday with Resto there himself opened up many of these revelations.
Tampered with during the fight against Billy Collins Jr., but plaster was used on the knuckles.
When I was commissioner of New York from 1988 to 1995, you had already spent time in jail. And many times during those years, you used to come up to my office and ask me for your license. I asked you, did you know what you had done? And you never answered me. I'm going to ask you again. Yeah. On that night, on June 16th, 1983, did you know that the padding was taken out of your gloves?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Whose idea was it to take the padding out of the glove and then use the plaster on the tape?
Panama is Panama Lewis. He also said, Resto, that Panama Lewis had done this in 3 other of his fights in his career. All 3 turned out to be wins. If you're not familiar with the story, again, Collins later, only a year later after losing, he would lose his career as a result from eye injuries suffered in that bout. And a year later, despondent and drinking, he would lose his life in a car crash. Basically, the fight kind of ruined his career, and many say ruined his life. His family certainly does. Panama Lewis, by the way, denies that he had anything to do with this, and said in recent comments, this was on FightNews.com, that he had did not put any plaster on the hand wraps of Resto. Let's bring in Teddy Atlas right now. And Teddy, you were very active in the New York scene at that point. You tell me where you want to start, Teddy. What is your reaction to these latest revelations that possibly, Resto is saying, there was plaster on his hand wraps that night where Collins took a brutal beating?
First of all, it's terrible that those echoes have to be brought back. And with that, the memories brought back for the family that is still here, and they have to think about that again. That's my first thought. I was there that night at the Garden when the father was actually grabbing the gloves and would not let go of them, of Resto, after he shook hands with him and congratulated him, and he was calling for inspectors to come over. So that's still in my mind. The thing that comes, look, it's cynical, but we're in a cynical place. We're in a bad place with this stuff. My first thought says, hey, what more can you do to this kid? He's dead, he's gone. And we know padding was removed. Now you're talking about plaster Paris. So when I say cynical, my first thought is there's a movie coming out. There's a documentary coming out. Is this something that in some ways insults his, Billy Collins' past and what his life even more by now trying to capitalize on bringing out something sensational to give a little attention for this documentary? I'm sorry, but that's my first thought, because if there was plaster of Paris, wouldn't there have been some proof of that? That's wet. That's clay-like. Wouldn't there have been some proof of that, some evidence, some physical evidence left over, Brian, inside the glove when the inspectors looked and examined the gloves and they found that there was a slit and that there was horsehair removed? Wouldn't they saw some kind of trace of the plaster of Paris too?
But so, if there wasn't Teddy, if there wasn't an inspection at the time, again, his wraps weren't confiscated, and you just pointed out it was Collins' father that was insisting that the gloves were taken. It kind of points to more things that weren't done. That again, the State Athletic Commission, maybe
Brian,
weren't on it at that night.
But Brian, if there was plaster of Paris, his hands went inside the gloves. There would be some you would think, I'm not a forensics expert, and I'm not trying to be, but you would think that there would be some evidence of that plaster of Paris left on the inside of the gloves. And once the police and the different forensics experts got those gloves, which they did eventually get the gloves, they would have brought that up. So you have to think, is this something sensational just to give a little bit more of a boost to this movie that's coming out to get more people's attention to it? Either way, it's still a tragedy. Either way, Billy Collins is still gone.
Is there something that can come out of this? Again, Andrea Collins-Nile, who is Billy Collins Jr.'s widow, has a suit, is still active, I guess, a suit that's being filed against the New York State Athletic Commission, State of New York, I guess, is the overall suit. But is there something that this at least calls attention to oversight? Again, there was that incident with Bernard Hopkins and Felix Trinidad where someone from the State Athletic Commission in New York came in and said, rewrap your hands. Don King said, if we have to rewrap his hands, there's no fight. And that person from the commission said, well, then there's no fight. I mean, is that at least the legacy of all this? And maybe this brings all that to light.
Well, the legacy of it is, if there's anything positive about a young man losing his life, and there's very little, is that now they check things where they never checked before. Now they don't give you the gloves and let you keep them for an hour, 2 hours before. Now the inspectors really do their job, and they make sure that those things are watched. So, and that their hands are watched when they're taped. So that's a legacy a little bit of Billy Collins, that other fighters will never have to suffer that same kind of fate. But as far as answering directly your question, from a legal standpoint, I don't know. Will it open up a civil case? Will it give some strength to a civil case for the widow? Perhaps. I would think so. I would think now with this new evidence, if nothing else, it would reinvest some interest in the right people and legal people to look at that and maybe not only give some closure, but maybe give some kind of, help financially to the family. That, from what I understand, that would be a good thing. That would be something positive in a very dismal situation.
Yeah, you're right. Well put, Teddy, because they're with the widow and also, Billy's father, to get some closure and perhaps, in this whole situation that's caused so much pain for them and obviously, their loved one as well. Teddy, thank you so much. All right, just take a look around again to get some other news in the world of boxing. BJ Flores is with us. We'll get him back in here as well just to go through that. Again, a stunning revelation from this week. Dan Rayfield on ESPN.com working on a bunch of things here. Vladimir Klitschko will come back in. He's #1 heavyweight in the world. Face mandatory challenger Tony Thompson scheduled July in Germany. Ruslan Shagayev will defend his title. Yes, Nikolai Valuev, the Giant, is back May 31st in Germany. And Chris Bird moving down to light heavyweight. Is that